The flavors of real foods, fruits, vegetables, meat that we would grow became blander
Mm,
at the same time that all these ultra processed foods, all the stuff that the
mm.
food industry makes, became absolutely irresistible.
I'm Carson Jorgensen, and this is the Carson Jorgensen Podcast. Hey, everybody. One of the questions I'm most often asked when it comes to agriculture is, how do we find your products, or where do we buy local? Folks, the guys at Crofter have been working on solving just that. They've created a marketplace that connects the producers to the consumers. You can get high quality products shipped to your front porch. Also, if you're a producer and you need an easier route to get your product to those consumers, visit crofter.com. Fill out the producer application and become a distributor on that marketplace. Again, that's crofter.com for high quality agricultural products shipped directly to your door. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining me today. Today, I've got with me Dr. Fred Provenza. Fred and I had the opportunity to visit today about so many fascinating topics. Fred is an absolute expert. He spent most of his life studying animals, grazing livestock, plants, ecosystems. There is so much to dive into today, and the conversation we had was absolutely fascinating. So I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Dr. Provenza, thanks for joining me today. Guys, there's something that I believe is really important, and this small series that I put together about red meat and its significance today. I think there are a lot of facets that we can climb into, and I'm looking forward to where we're headed today. But before we get started, Dr. Provenza, would you like to, introduce yourself, but also let's talk a little bit about what you've spent your life working on?
Sure, Carson, and you can call me Fred for sure. I'm not a formal kind of guy, and I think for me, it all began uh, where I was born and raised over in Colorado, in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado, and from when I was a teeny kid, I was interested in anything that moved: insects, fish, birds, mammals. I was totally fascinated by that. And when I finished high school, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I thought, that stuff interests me. So I'm going to go to Colorado State University and get in wildlife biology with the rest of the world. No jobs in it because everybody
Right.
wants. We went up there and they said, there's no jobs. This was the profs that were taking us on the tour with my family. There's no jobs in this, so you really should rethink it. But
Great
we were
recruiting.
doing that because we were interested. So I was in Colorado State in wildlife biology, but a key part of the story starts when I was a senior in high school. During the summers in high school, I worked in a greenhouse. And my senior year, a friend that was going to go to college in CSU, he'd actually been already 3 years to college and hadn't graduated. He was going to go to CSU. Anyway, he said, "You want to earn some extra money this summer?" I said, "Sure." He said, "We can earn 8 cents a bale hauling hay at Henry DeLuca's ranch." I said, "Sounds good to me." So we did that, and I absolutely loved it. Absolutely loved being out there on the ranch. We hauled hay in the evenings and on the weekends, and like most ranches, the people need help. And Henry said, "I need a summer helper. Will you work for me?" So I went to work there that next summer. Worked my way through college. Then I ran the place for 2 years after that, and once I'd graduated, I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I thought, well, I'll just go back to the ranch. Henry needs somebody to run it. We were going to split all the calves, the lambs, the alfalfa, and everything. So I'd run it, and we'd split what came off of the ranch. And but that combination of being in wildlife biology and of working on the ranch and being out there, that changed my life, no question about it. And I often like to talk about Henry and the ranch years. Henry DeLuca was the old guy. When I was there in '69, he was 69 years old. He was born in 1900, so it's
Oh,
easy to
wow.
track his age. And he had no formal education at all, none. But what he had was a lifetime of observing, of being hands on involved with the landscape. And I sound old now because I'm older than Henry was in those days now. But I think back to those days and I think of the intimate relationship that we had with those landscapes. We hauled hay by hand, as I'm saying, and I'm not against the technology. Let's but
Yeah.
we hauled hay by hand, not machines. We irrigated everything by hand, no pivots. It was all done by hand, and the art of irrigation, whether it's irrigating grain up or irrigating alfalfa fields. We moved cattle on horseback uh, from the ranch to BLM up onto Forest Service country, and we just had the more we distance ourselves, I think, and I understand the pressures nowadays, financial and all the rest, but the more we distance ourselves from that intimate contact, we lose a relationship. You can't love something that you're not in intimate contact with. And we were in
Mm.
intimate contact with the soil, with the plants, with the water, with the animals. And I've never felt so grounded and centered in my life as I did. And I can't help but think, what have we lost as a society and as a culture as we distanced ourselves from our intimate relationship with our mother, basically, huh? With
Yeah,
this
yeah.
planet. What have we lost? And so, what you ask, what did we study and so forth? And so, I'm going to tell you one more story, and then we'll get into that.
Stories are the best.
But I remember my sophomore year in college, I took that spring quarter. I took a class in genetics. They're talking about genetics, animal science, and learning about heterosis and crossbreeding, a bunch of the things that people do. And I went back to the ranch that summer and I was talking to Henry and I said, I notice, Henry, you always keep your own replacement heifers, never bring any animals in from the outside. And I said, why do you do that? I've been learning about this heterosis and stuff. He was a Hereford man. That's what he,
Yeah.
and they had sheep, by the way, but he was a Hereford man. And he sat down, and you know how the days are on a ranch. And I was working as a slave, basically 10 hours a day, 6 days a week for nothing, but
Yeah.
not for nothing.
Sounds like agriculture, but
It is agriculture, it was that, but learning. But he'd take the time, and he took the time, and he started telling me stories. He says, "Oh yeah, I did that before. I did that." And he said, "You know how when we go up into the high country to move cattle, and we've got them back in those days, it was rest rotation grazing. And that's a good way of grazing, actually, where you're moving the rest around the landscape. Now we're into other kinds of grazing, right? And these
yeah.
things become fads in my sense nowadays. As you
Yeah.
look, if you lived 1,000 years, you'd see all this stuff changing forever, right? So rest rotation was going to save the nation back in those days. And he said, you know how we move across the pasture seasonally? And I did. And he said, you know how when we go in, and he was talking about a particular pasture, one of these big ones. And he said, when we go in there, we know that we've got to go check here and we've got to go check over there because there's going to be a few here and a few there. They're not in one big group, right? They're in these little groups. And the way he kept his animals, when I reflect back now, I think what they were is extended families. They were the beginnings of extended families, mothers
Hmm.
and offspring and grandmother and so forth. That's what were in these groups. He said, well, you bring cattle in that don't know the country. You don't know if you're going to find them. You don't know where you're going to find them.
Hmm.
And they're not going to be bred by the end of the summer. You're not going to get bred. And so he told me, I won't wear us out with all the stories, but he just told me a whole bunch of stories. And he summed the whole thing up. He said, the basic problem is cattle just don't know the range. That's what we studied for 45, 35, 45, 50 years at Utah State. That's what we were studying. What does it mean for an animal to know the range and to be locally adapted to those landscapes? And what does that mean economically, ecologically, socially? Um, so that's what we're studying, that kind of intimate relationship that animals develop, and the cultures that form when animals do know a landscape and they know what and what not to eat, where and where not to go, what's a predator, what's not a predator. And so we studied that at all different levels, everything from these metabolically mediated feedbacks. That's a bunch of terms for you right there.
Yeah.
But that show that what we were showing is that the sense of taste is in touch with all the organ systems of the body, basically. That, you think, why does any creature eat, including us? What's it feeding? It's cells, right? And what we were studying at one level is how cells and organ systems alter liking for the flavor of food as a function of need. And we did that with energy, with protein, with minerals, with vitamins, and showing that these feedbacks are altering liking as a function of the needs of the animals, pregnant or not pregnant, parasite load, not parasite load, need for calcium or phosphorus or magnesium or whatever it is. We were showing there's a wisdom of the body that has to be in there, not only for meeting needs for nutrients, but for medicating as well. We showed animals can learn to use plants to self-medicate for internal parasites, for bloat, for acidosis, for on and on and on and on. We were showing that. So there's this wisdom of the body. That was one facet that we got into. There was another facet, this whole transgenerational linkages to landscapes, learning from mother, the culture, from grandmother to mother to offspring. And that knowledge, as I was saying, of what and what not to eat, where and where not to go, what's a predator, what's not a predator, of all the home field advantage, basically. We were
Yeah.
studying all facets of that and learning that it starts in the womb when it comes to all kinds of things, but
Sure.
we were focused on food and showing that fetal taste system's fully functional the last trimester of gestation. So the flavors of the foods mom's eating are getting into her amniotic fluid. And the young water creature's already learning what food is before it's even born. After birth, flavors that get into mother's milk. And one can think, well, so what's that matter? Well, take animals and put them on a range they've never been on and look at how many of them can die from eating poisonous plants. Those are those linkages. So mom's starting to get the young offspring familiar with what's food. Then, being young creatures, they sample things, right? They try things that mom maybe didn't try. They do that. But we showed over and over again, offer them a meal of several foods, offer them a food they've never seen before. They eat a little bit of that, and then you make them mildly ill. We don't need to go into details how we do that, but make them mild.
Yeah.
Next day, what do they avoid? They avoid the novel food, not the familiar food. So mom becomes this incredibly important link. And we were showing too, this whole field nowadays of epigenetics, of genes being expressed as a function of experiences in utero and early in life. It's not that the genome is set in stone. It's that within the cell, the DNA within one cell is enough that the information in that fills entire encyclopedias. Entire encyclopedias. That's not set. That's being expressed then as a function of interaction with the environment. So we were showing those kind of relationships that, you take a young animal, you expose it to certain kinds of foods early in life, it changes form and function of organ systems in the body. The liver is different, the kidneys are different, the rumen is different, the central nervous system. All those things are developing as a function of that relationship with the environment, which is amazing, right? The world's
Yeah.
constantly changing. That's how creatures continually evolve in these ever changing environments. So that was a second part of this know the range. The third part was the importance of biodiversity and diversity of plant species for animals. And just over and over again, we were showing that the more you restrict an animal, the more you put it in a box, the more they've got
Right.
choices, choice and ability to choose. That allows two things. One is ability to meet needs for nutrients and self-medicate. The other is, and this struck me so much, this idea that no two creatures are ever alike. No two creatures have ever been the same on in this planet.
Right.
Um, you have genes plus ever-changing environments plus chance. During development, chance actually plays a role, bubbles up from the quantum level. And so, um, given that no two creatures are alike, if you offer them choices, that enables each creature to meet its need. We did some studies with sheep and with cattle where we were finishing them, putting them on finishing rations.
Yeah.
We had one group would get a total mixed ration, which is typical of feedlots, right? That's
Yeah,
what
sure.
I'm not going to be. I'm not a critic of feedlots. I understand how that evolved, and I worked with a lot of people that did that work. Um, but we were questioning some of the things the more we went along and seeing this no two alike. So one group got a total mixed ration, no choice, right? You just eat what's.
Yeah, just eat what's in
The
front of
other
you.
group got the ingredients that are in that ration. And then we looked at, okay, how much food do they eat? How long does it take them to finish? When they are finished, what's their body composition like? And what we were finding is they could finish just as fast on either way, but it cost less to feed the ones that were offered a choice. Why? They were eating less food. They were able to meet their needs more better when they had a choice than when they were given the total mixed ration. So let's just take that and say we could look at a protein to energy ratio, right? That you're going to formulate your ration around that to meet the needs for the average animal in that group. And that's set when it's on a total mixed ration. But when you give them a choice, they can create their own protein to energy ratio, right? And so when
Sure.
we looked at that for each individual, some were higher, some were lower. There was nobody who was on that average line, but each one was doing what it needed to do to meet its needs, and they did it at less cost than if we'd have put them on the total mixed ration. It's interesting. I just saw a study recently on chickens where they were showing the same damn thing. Well, and so anyway, that's like I say, I can go into infinite digress, Carson, but that
No.
that all came out of those years on the ranch and out of the wildlife biology background, learning about plants and animals. And when I think back, what Henry said, they just don't know the range. That's what we were learning about in all those. What's it mean to know for an animal to know the range?
Yeah, and sometimes you just got to open your eyes and try to pay attention to what's actually happening in front of you to be able to understand what's actually happening. And I think that can lead us to a lot more solutions than just agriculture. And in your um, thoughts there, there's a lot to unpack for certain. But I am curious too on, and I've been thinking about it a lot lately, actually, is the same thing with humans and that diversity of food supply and the nutritional factors. Also, and I think that's why red meat right now is making such a strong comeback, or whatever it is you want to call this red meat revolution that we're having at the moment. But it is making a comeback because people understand um, what's going into grazing these animals and the nutrients that they're picking up from all these different varieties of being able to graze and to rotate and to do all of these things, and the nutrient diversity that the food has that you're actually consuming now. But I want to know your thoughts on global trade, because I've been thinking about that lately in humans, to where our nutritional, where it doesn't come, where we're able to eat food from across the world now. We're not eating food that's specific to where we are. We're shipping avocados in from Chile. We're bringing shrimp from India. We're bringing rice from Laos. It is a big giant conglomerate of food, but not much of it is coming from where we live and the ecosystem in which we live in. So what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that we are shorting ourselves as humans because of where we're bringing our food and the calories that we're eating that aren't coming from where we are.
Yes, I really think that the more we could become local and eat locally, eat support people who are raising plants locally. And I know it gets complicated with all this
Sure.
with the trade and everything else, but that whole idea of local and local adaptation to the environments that we inhabit. I think it's the same things for humans as it is for those livestock. You know what popped into my mind, Carson, when you said that too, is some of what I've read on mothers not nursing their children.
Oh yeah.
You know, just buy formula that's formulated from who knows what kind of junk, basically, probably ultra
Right.
processed different kinds of things. But you break every linkage you have to the
Hmm.
local environment. You know, if we were eating locally, eating the plants and animals that are in our environment, that links us in health as well as in physical. And to me, it becomes a very spiritual thing as well. Those intimate relationships with a landscape, with you can see um, the beauty of the Creator in every pine needle, in every plant, in every all of that. Because it becomes so grounding and centering for me, anyway, as physical and spiritual, and contributes to our health. And that local is such an intimate part of that. But we've so broken our linkages with the landscapes that we inhabit that, and I'm not trying to place blame. This is just an old person reflecting. But I think,
Sure.
when I grew up in this little town of Salida in the Rocky Mountains, there were about 7,000 people there, and I think about that a lot. And I appreciated the 35 years in Utah for this as well.
Yeah.
But this town, I get, we had we still had extended family there, So there was the grandmother, the great aunts, the cousins, and of course the family. And you felt the love and nurturing of extended family. Beyond that, all the families knew the other families in that community, for better or worse, too.
Right. Right.
It's
Oh,
always
don't
good,
I know?
but it was a wonderful, wonderful place to grow up in that sense. Those relationships, and then those relationships with the environment around us. Um, you know, everybody grew huge gardens. Everybody was a forager in a sense too. Seasonally we knew different things to forage on, and not
Yeah.
that we were like indigenous folks in the sense that's that was the whole lifestyle, but there was still those elements of fishing, of hunting, of getting mushrooms in the fall. All that is linking you, right? It's linking you
Sure.
with the landscapes that you inhabit, and I see huge value in that. And I see some of the things. A week ago, I was up here. There's a outfit called Old Salt, and they have a festival each year. And young people like you with lots of energy and doing wonderful, wonderful things in terms of trying to produce foods locally, to set up food distribution locally, um, so that people can be linked with food production in the environment. I really support those kinds of things. I think there's huge value in that. I'll tell you one other story too. So we don't have a place here. We live on an acre and a half. That's it. We've got a few chickens, and they aren't even allowed. But it's a long story how we ended up with our chick. We'd like to have a few lambs, but anyway. So we buy from these people that we know locally. That's what we do. And there's one, Francois and Kate live few hours drive from here. They do a wonderful job raising beef,
Mm.
and they finish it on diverse pastures, and the flavor of their meat is incredible. It's just, and it's just top quality. But we foolishly decided to have a family reunion a couple years ago on over the 4th of July weekend. And so my four sisters and their husbands and some of their kids came up here, and it was a wonderful time. This valley up here, the Madison Valley, is just beautiful. The mountain
Mm.
ranges on both sides, the Madison River. So we could
Oh yeah.
take people up to the Gravelies and show them incredible plant diversity up there. We could float them down the Madison River and so forth. So it was a great place just to get together with the family and enjoy the company. And so on the 4th, we cooked steaks. We cooked some of Francois' steaks. Didn't say a word about it, didn't even think about it, just cooked all these steaks up. And I told Sue, that's about twice as much meat as we're going to need. But she said, no, we got to be sure to have enough meat. And so, okay, so we cook all these jillions of steaks. There wasn't a piece of meat left. And the people were just absolutely raving, oh my gosh, this is the best meat. And, I thought about it and I thought, if you want to get people to appreciate animals that are finished on forages and and to be able to just raise a conversation. And by the way, not only is that diverse array of foods they were eating better for their health, it's better for your health. And that flavor that you're tasting is coming from that. And so
Yeah.
I was able to just say a few words about that when they were saying, where do you get it? How much does it cost? How can we get some of this? And so it just, that whole business of local. But there's another thing that came up. I was reading an article, and I've been involved in some of this research, looking at bison, finishing bison either on rangeland or finishing them on in confinement. But this in confinement they offer some grain, some alfalfa hay, some meadow hay, and some silage. So there's some diversity in
Yeah.
there. And what the work that I was involved in helping with, we were looking at let's say the phytochemical, all these compounds that are in plants that get into meat, not just protein, energy, minerals, and omega 3s and those kind of things, but all these other diverse arrays of compounds that plants produce. We don't need to get into that, but they're health promoting is the thing, many of them. And so we had shown that those animals on rangeland had much greater diversity of those compounds. But this study that followed up was looking at flavor preferences in people, and they
Yeah.
had they had they had people who were like us, just common folks eating the sampling the two kinds of meat. Then they had these flavor testers that they do that for a living, and both groups preferred the ones that were finished in the confinement to the ones that were out on rangeland. They said, well, they had a gamier taste and a little bit more ammonia kind of taste and so forth. And it got
Huh.
me thinking a lot about that and thinking about all the hunting that we did and the deer and elk that we used to kill. And then we put them in the cooler for 2 weeks to tenderize them and so forth in the walk-in cooler. But there are different flavors that are going to get into meat, right? I mean,
Sure.
that's
Sure.
part of part of this deal. And then you say, well, is it the meat or is it my past experience with the meat? I was at Utah State for 35 years, worked with people from around the country, had graduate students from not around the country, around the world, all over the world. And you know what they used to tell me, people from other countries? They say, your meat has no flavor. Your meat. So there you go. You see the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah.
They're used to animals that were finished on different kind of rations, and their meat
Sure.
had it's got
I
some flavor.
had a kick to it, that's for
It had
sure.
a kick to it, and
Whether you
so
like the kick or not is yet to be seen.
that's right. And if you're born and raised with certain thing, you're going to accept that. That's part of the flavor. So that's part of what we get into here when people say, well, it's got a little more gamey flavor. Well, so does deer and elk,
Yeah.
because they're eating these diverse arrays of plants. We used to teach a short course, 2 week short course on all this stuff we were doing. And it was hands on. We'd have people out working with animals every day, training animals to do one thing or another, and just seeing how quickly they learn. And it was amazing to see the relationships that people would develop with those creatures.
No,
How come?
but on that topic of filling needs in your diet with things that taste good and your body's ability to tell you what it needs to eat to be able to fill out what you're missing. Do you think, and because I always bring it back to humans, and I tell people this all the time, we're not that much different from animals. Our bodies know exactly what we need and when we need it if we'll just shut up long enough to listen to it. And I mean, we have, let's be completely frank here. We have an obesity epidemic in our country. We have poor health in our country when it comes to humans. Do you attribute a lot of that to exactly what we're talking about here, is people eating the same thing and not giving themselves those options, whether it's because of cost, whether it's because of where you live, whatever that may be. Maybe it's sugar, maybe those dampen the ability to tell what you need and to be able to have your body communicate that. But do you think that plays a part in this? And maybe again, is that why red meat is making such a resurgence, because it's able to fill so many of those needs all at the same time?
Yeah, amen to everything you said, Carson. I think that's it. I think there was a book that was written several years ago titled "The Dorito Effect," and
Hmm.
it's a great book. It was written by a Canadian author, Mark Shaxter. But what he's making the point for how food systems have changed in the last 50, 75 years. And two really key points. The flavors of real foods, fruits, vegetables, meat that we would grow became blander
Hmm.
at the same time that all these ultra processed foods, all the stuff that the
Hmm.
food industry makes, became absolutely irresistible. So we've
Sugar.
disincentivized real food because it has no flavor. And
Yeah.
we've made ultra processed food absolutely irresistible. And it's I think, you can get into um, endless discussions of this, but to me, that's the bottom line of the whole deal of what's happened. And what you say, I heard a statistic recently about recruitment into the military in this country, and the statistic was that only 23% of young people 18 to 24 years old even qualify to
Yeah.
get into the military. And most of them aren't interested. The other 77% don't qualify either because they can't pass the aptitude test or they
Hmm.
physically are in such poor, they're obese basically. So it's and again, not trying to place blame, but it's important to take a look in the mirror right now and say
Sure
we're
it
not
is.
a healthy country. Period.
We
We are
screwed
not.
something up. We got to figure out why.
That's right. And so, and meat gets bad mouthed a lot. And I'm just reading a long article in a really prestigious proceeding, National Academy of Sciences, where they've they've got meat in the crosshairs, and
Hmm.
the group that's been publishing, they've been publishing for years, and it's clear that they aren't fond of meat. And they're, nowadays,
Yeah.
all this gets linked back with climate change. It doesn't matter what your feelings are on that, but it gets linked back with that. And this article, they were focused on regenerative practices. Actually, they were focused on animals coming from rangelands and animals that were coming from pasture lands, and just saying, they've got this tremendous carbon footprint and so forth and so on. But And so a friend and I, he's back in New York. We thought, we should write a rebuttal to that and just make some points relative to some of the points that they were making. But one of the points I want to make related to what you are saying is, despite the push by many that we should just be eating plants, we should be vegetarian or vegan, it virtually doesn't happen anywhere in this country or around the world. Even in India, only 30% of the people there are vegetarian or vegan.
Right.
And I think a key part of that is just that meat is such a great food for meeting needs. It really is a great, all the essential amino acids and various minerals and so forth and so on. And so it's in theory easy to argue, I guess, that, well, let's just eat plants. But in practice, it doesn't happen. And
Yeah.
I can send you the details of, we're reviewing a bunch of literature on that. It's just people, there's a strong, I think, now another article's coming to mind where they were doing studies of vegetarians and vegans and doing neural scans.
Oh
And
yeah.
even though they might be, for and this, so I don't mean to like be criticizing vegetarians and vegans in any sense, but just trying to say in this particular study, for one reason or another, maybe they don't like CAFOs, maybe they don't like the way that animals are treated in CAFOs, or they feel badly of killing animals or so forth. But what they were saying was not reflected in the neural scans. And the neural scans are revealing a craving for meat, and so it's, well, and then it gets into this irony that here on this planet, life lives on life, right? Life lives
Yeah.
on eating other life. And you can get into this whole business of plants as not only conscious, but perhaps even sentient as well. Those plants, just because they don't get up and walk around, when you were talking earlier about observing and learning, just letting the plants and animals teach you. I was thinking of how much plants had taught me over the years of just working with plants and watching, looking at how animals are responding to plants in different environments. And that's a whole textbook right there. And it's not in a high school or a college. It's out there just paying attention. What's happening with this and with that and the next thing. And you, if you're quiet, I guess, and not that I'm any of this stuff, but I mean, if
I
you
know the
can get
feeling.
into that, and if you love that, you could be taught, as we were saying before we got on air, there's enough for 10 jillion lifetimes, and you still wouldn't exhaust all the knowledge, the wisdom that's in all of that, huh? That comes
No.
from, yeah.
And you're
So,
absolutely right, man. And talking about like the ultra processed foods and the things, what's funny about all of that to me, and somewhat comical oftentimes, is everybody still loves a steak. Everybody still loves a good lamb chop. It doesn't matter what you eat or where you go. Everybody still loves a good piece of meat, regardless of it. And I think there's more to it than just it tastes good. I think our bodies are calling for that kind of thing, and the nutrient rich food that red meat is, and the ability, for it to continue to feed your body. And you talk about the neural scans. um, we often forget. I mean, we could dive into a whole nother side of this. It's, what they've been telling us for years about meat, that meat's 1 year meat's bad for you, cholesterol's bad for you, the next year it's good for you, saturated fat, trans fats, all these things. I mean, I go back to the eggs. For years it was eggs are good for you, eggs are bad for you, eggs are good for you, eggs are bad. And we went back and forth. I think most people have whiplash from learning whether butter or margarine was better for you. And so we've had this relationship, or what people are told, the higher ups are telling everybody is good and bad. But yet the more studies that are done and the things that we're finding out today is that your mind and your brain runs on ketones, and that you are ultimately, your brain is made up of a big chunk of cholesterol, and those are the types of things that your body actually needs to function and to be cognitive. And so I think it's just extremely fascinating now that the truth seems to be coming to the surface, and with the ability to disseminate information through podcasts and through the internet, and with all of the things that we have today, that the truth really does move to the top. And you touched on something in there that I think is extremely important when we're talking about relationships, and with our relationship to the earth and to the plants and stuff. The big thing lately and for the last several years seems to be climate change, and everything comes in the name of climate change. And now you see them putting these refractories in to where they can sequester carbon back into the ground, and they're using pipelines and pump stations to suck carbon out of the atmosphere and pipe it and pump it back underground. I mean, anybody that knows anything, I'm afraid that we're getting way ahead of ourselves in the name of trying to save that we're actually going to cause some serious damage. I mean, in Wyoming right now and South Dakota, a few other places out here, they're putting these carbon pump stations where they're actually pumping carbon back under the ground. But anybody who knows, when you take carbon dioxide, push it back underground, and mix it with water, it makes carbonic acid, which dissolves rock. And we don't know the ramifications of what we're doing. I tell people, why the fuss? Why the hate for red meat? Why the hate for agriculture? Because there is methods of carbon sequestration that are natural. There are those things. Agriculture is the only industry on the planet that is net zero when you take out what it offsets. And so why the big push? And that's what I always find fascinating about these scholars who are making the case for climate change, but in the same breath, they are saying we have to get rid of agriculture in the way that we do it now. We have to get rid of grazing animals because the studies don't support what they're saying. And so when they say trust the science, okay, what science are we talking about? Because the science that we see, that you and I see, and that the range actually manifests is a completely different thing than what the science that they're talking about, because we don't need carbon sequestration plants. You know what we need? More grazing livestock. You know what we need? More trees. You know what we need? To run across the range, graze the plants off, let them photosynthesize, pull the carbon out of the atmosphere, and start growing again. So why do you, I mean, we can pontificate about why all day, but why do you see this disconnect? Why do you think that disconnect is?
Yeah, you raise a bunch of points and a ton of good points, Carson. I want to go back to one where you started, and then try to wind through
Oh yeah,
the.
it was a big one, but
No, it was a good one. It was a good one. You you were saying, you were talking about all the advice that we've gotten over the years, and again, not to criticize folks, but all the work that gets done, any of us, it's all incomplete, right? It's never a full story of anything. It's hard to wrap our brains around the complexity of all that's going on. Let's take meat, for example. There's 45,000 different compounds in meat alone.
wow.
45, and then you graze them on really diverse pastures, add another few thousand in there, right?
Yeah.
But you're never going to study all of that, right?
Yeah.
It reductionist science doesn't lend itself to that. But you put that in your mouth and it goes into your body. Your body knows what to do with all of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a miracle right there. That's incredible to think of that. Just think of that complexity. Now I want to bring you back and get you. You said it's not only taste; it's that your body needs. What to recognize is that your body is telling your taste buds what it needs. It's
Yeah.
changing your liking as a function of need, if that makes sense. If you,
Sure.
there's a nerve called the vagus that innervates all these organ systems of the body. Where does that vagus goes? It goes right here to the brain stem. It converges with nerves for taste, one on one, right there. And so that's just one simple example. It gets more complicated than that, but it's just of these feedbacks So when you say, I really like the taste of that steak, that's all your cells and organs in your body saying, hey, we groove
More
on
of
this.
this.
Okay,
More of
give me
this.
more. So, but it becomes very simple, right? Do you like the taste of it? Don't you like the taste of it? And so it's this really functional interconnection between all the
Yeah.
cells, the trillions of cells and organ systems in your body, and this taste and that changing of liking. That's what we were showing over and over again in the studies that we did. Make an animal mildly nutrient deficient, boy, it's going to like the put some crappy food there, infuse them with the nutrient they need while they're eating that food. They got a strong preference for that food. So it's this functional relationship. And you're right, the complexity of that. But what we've done, we've come to rely, and again, I'm not criticizing authorities. We've come to rely on advice from authorities, and we've ignored the one authority that really knows
That matters.
your own body. Yeah, that's right. But then it comes back to that book, The Dorito Effect. If you're raising foods mainly for yield and not for nutrient density, each fall, when we have to start late fall, when we have to start buying stuff at the store again, the lettuce, the tomatoes, the carrots, I'm
Hmm.
just reminded how shitty the food system is.
Right.
I mean, we're growing for yield, not for phytochemical richness. Those
Yep.
carrots we grow, and I've read a bunch of studies where they were talking, how do you get kids to eat their vegetables? Let's put sugar on it. Let's put this or that. That's what you need to do is grow nutrient rich vegetables. They'll love them. So we give carrots to our neighbors next door. They've got these two young kids, nicest kids, nice family. And those little kids came over to Sue and they said, those carrots are so delicious. It's like, yeah, that's because we grow good varieties and we
Right.
grow them. I'm wearing out that point, but it's a huge point. You can't grow for yield. You have to be
Man.
growing for nutrient richness. And then, of course, the kids like their vegetables because they've got a richness of flavor. And what's telling them that? It's the cells and organ systems of their body saying, hey, this is good stuff,
Oh
as
man.
compared to you buy those carrots that come now and they're just so absolutely tasteless. And anyway, it's a huge
Oh.
point that so I'm going back to that point to reinforce it. It's a
Oh.
huge deal that and to the degree that people can raise their own plants. And so in this acre and a half that we've got here, tying in with your climate change part of things, we decided, we don't want a big lawn here. What we're going to do is encourage the native species, the native plant
Sure.
species, because that's what grows here naturally. And we're going to plant a ton of trees. Sure, they fix carbon, and that's good, and they can put it down there deep, long time. So we've got 100 different trees we've planted, native species and shrubs and so forth. And as much as anything, it's for the beauty for us. We look and we see and then all the pollinators come and the different species, and so it creates a beautiful kind of a ecosystem, right? And most people can't be ranchers or farmers, right? And
Yeah.
most people, but if you own a piece of ground, you can have a think about what do you do with that piece of ground. And if you're thinking about the value of fixing carbon and not using, the amount of water out in the arid West that we use for irrigation of lawns
Yeah.
and of golf courses, it's enormous. I've looked at those figures before, and you think, well, what if we just had maybe little tiny lawn, but then let the native species. And people drive down this road here, and they stop and they say, "Your place is so beautiful. What did you plant?" We say, "Well, that's what nature planted. That's what grows here. All these
And it grows
different
well. You don't
flowers,
have to really try hard to do it, and that's
and
what's
you don't have
amazing
to."
about it.
And that's another thing that's coming on nowadays is you see much more of interest in in native plants and xeriscaping, huh? But to
Yeah.
me, there's been places I've gone in Colorado where they just put rocks in their place. It's like, man, that's kind of heat intensive.
Heat trap. Yeah.
create a create a hell in your own yard. You're going to fuck yourself. Why not plant all these native plants that grow there and that go seasonally, and that would create a nice environment? But all that then gets tied in with. And the controversies are never going to end over this business. Huh? You were talking about that, and I was mentioning this paper that I just read, where they're um, clearly not interested in livestock on rangelands. But Carson, this goes back a long time. This is where old
Yeah.
age. Back when I was a prof at Utah State, I taught an upper level undergraduate class on managing natural resources, basically. And we had kids from all different disciplines that took that class: wildlifers, fisheries people, geography people, animal science people, agronomy people. And what you've got to realize is those kids came in there with totally different views of this planet and what needed to be on this planet. This is not new. This is not new at all. Those
Yeah.
are back in the cattle free by 93 days. I don't know if you even heard about those days, but that was the push. And
Wait,
that was
cattle
before
free by 93. Now we're in 30 by 30. And now,
Yeah, that was way before climate change was even on the radar screen.
right.
But there was let's get rid of all livestock do is degrade landscapes. And when I was in wildlife biology at CSU, the wildlife people weren't fond of the range people because they viewed
Hmm.
livestock as despoilers of landscapes. And that happened
Sure.
in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Now we
Yep.
know that there was a lot of overgrazing. Was it intentional? No,
Sure
it
there
was just
was.
not even realizing that these lands are a different kind of landscape, low precip. Um, but here's what I want to say that I think about a lot nowadays. So those kids came into that class and they were pissed off. I'm not kidding you. They were angry, and so first day of class, I'd introduce myself and say, okay, we'll go around the room and everybody introduce themselves. And you could just see the anger in their voices, even when they were introducing themselves. I remember this secretary that decided she wanted to take the class, middle-aged gal. And after that first day, she came up to me and said, how do you, the kids are going to kill each other in this class. Don't worry, don't worry. By then, I had figured how to work with that. But I'm going to tell you one other story. Then I'm going to come to the key point here. So there's a kid named Wally had to take the class. He came in a week late, and when he got to class, I said, "Okay, introduce yourself." And you could tell he was just angry as well, and not
With the
wanting to
world.
take the class. And he said, "I just come back from Cowshit Canyon, which is Grand Canyon, Escalante, Grand Staircase, and there were cattle down there, and he'd walked in some
Sure.
cow poop, and so he wasn't thrilled with that. So just came back from Cowshit Canyon, and then a little later, I think it was that same day, there was an animal science student was saying, "Well, you have to eat meat to be healthy." To which Wally stands up, rips his shirt off, and says, "The hell you do!" And so this is the level that was in that class of. But what I had learned by then, and is that this was the perfect teaching environment, the perfect environment to turn its into thous, because they saw each other as its,
Mm,
to turn its into thous. And how did we do that? We did that through dialogue. The
sure.
students led the dialogue. The students led the dialogue. So I would call on you. You never knew when, Carson. Okay, we read this paper or we watched this thing. Now you're going to start us off on leading the dialogue. The kids would come into class with pages of notes, because
Waiting
they
for
never
their
knew
turn.
when it was going to be their turn to lead the dialogue. And my role was to facilitate, was to create an environment, and to
Mm,
create an environment of vulnerability. we like to be the big know-it-all, right?
Oh yeah.
I'm the prof, you're the students, and then the egos are battling with one another. The point was to create an environment where you could have a conversation. And it was amazing to see what happened in there. We laughed, we cried, we spoke from our hearts. It was no longer,
Hmm.
we spoke from our heart about the challenging issues of the day, which are the same issues that are here nowadays as well. And the knowledge that was in those, quote, young students it was mind-boggling. After doing that for a while, it was like I could never go back to I lecture, you take notes, and then you tell me what I told you on an in-class exam.
Yeah.
It was, we and everyone, the beauty was, after that environment was created, everyone was free and willing to speak from the heart. And they knew Carson's not going to jump on me. He's going to listen to what I have to say, and I'm going to listen to what he has to say. And the ways that we came up with to manage these really challenging, complex kind of issues were just mind boggling. It was amazing to see what was coming out of that dialogue, out of that interrelationship, and out of speaking from the heart, taking off the
Yeah.
egoic kind of I know and you don't and blah blah blah. And so there were no more in-class exams, they were take-home exams. And it was tell me what this means to you personally and professionally. And if you think it's a blow of shit, tell it.
Yeah.
And reading what those students said and reading the transformation that would take place during that semester. I remember students come in and say, do you know how mind-boggling it is to come into this class from other classes? They said, you can't even imagine what it's like to come into, um, because of what it was an amazing experience. And I think about that nowadays, and I think about it related to politics. Politicians could be models for how to work through complex. I mean, these are
It could
huge
could
challenges that
be. They're not, but they could be.
logically, economically, socially, these
Sure.
are challenging times, huh?
Yeah.
They Politicians could be models for how you dialogue about these things and how you work your way through. And from what I've read back in the 50s and 60s, maybe I don't know if it was it, but they used to talk about it in Washington D.C. in the House and Senate that they worked much more together. They really
Yeah.
tried the different. Now it's so polarized, and it's the worst thing that can happen. And what I think about too, the worst thing you can do is surround yourself with sycophants and bootlickers that just
Yeah.
whatever you say. See, that was the beauty in this class. Everybody had these different views and different world experiences. The wildlifer, the fisheries person, the range person, the animal science person. When you put all those together, you came up with much more robust ways to think about how we're going to manage these landscapes. And that was happening on a practical scale with people we worked with in this program called Behave. I think of Bob Budd managing Red Canyon Ranch for Nature Conservancy. It was fabulous what he was doing over there because all these issues were a part of it. But what he did, he had his group of advisors and he had people from all different disciplines. And he said, look, I don't want you to come in here with your badges on and your uniforms. Come in here. I want you for what's in your head and for you to sit down with us. And the ways they came up with to manage Red Canyon Ranch and for the benefit of all the, whether it was riparian areas, water quality, biodiversity, livestock production. They went from a couple hundred head living in those riparian areas, beating them to death, to like six, seven, 800 head because they retrained the cattle herd to use uplands as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to living in riparian areas. It's just, I'm quite passionate about that. I think we really, the worst thing you can do is surround yourself with sycophants and bootlickers.
Oh, for
The best
sure.
thing you can do is to create an environment where you get people with different views, which we have, working together to develop shared vision and learning as
Yeah.
teams and shared vision. I think we need
And
that more now more than ever. More than
oh
ever.
yeah, and there's plenty of people. I think a big problem of it for me is there's plenty of people that just regurgitate what they see online, and nobody really develops a thought pattern for themselves because it's too easy to steal the thought pattern from somebody else and to just use those and not think through. Because for me, when I go into a situation, I want somebody to challenge what I believe because if I don't, if I am not firm enough in my convictions and my belief in it, that I'm afraid that somebody's going to take that away or have a differing opinion is going to change how I feel about it. You don't have an opinion to start with. You don't have an idea. You don't have a foundation to start with. And so that's how I see that. And I wish more people would approach it that way is go ahead, challenge my ideas because it's been a long time building and there's been a lot of thought and process go into developing these things, not just from me, but from my family, my father, my grandfather, his dad before him on both sides. Like we have spent a lot of time building these ideas and looking for the most efficient way to do things. And so I'm all in when it comes to people, what do you believe on this? Boy, I'll tell you. And I think that we can have those discussions. And I think for so long, farmers and ranchers have been quiet about it. They haven't told their side of the story, and we've let the other side develop the storyline and demonize us or put us in the corner. But lately, you see, this resurgence in people turning back to holistic management practices and targeted grazing, and you're seeing these old ideas come forward again. And not only that, but a nostalgia surrounding ranching. And I hate to say this, but you see movies and television series is like Yellowstone and those types of things that are bringing awareness in a mainstream way to the thing and really romanticizing the agricultural industry. And that honestly, the impact that it's had is pretty astonishing to me because it opens up people's eyes in a way to what we're actually dealing with, and it's actually changing minds in a way that we haven't really been able to before. And to see, I've noticed a notable shift in people since Yellowstone became a thing. And it's unfortunate that we have to say that because it should have been romanticized all along, but we'll take it where we can get it. I mean, and so you're seeing this big turn back to all of these things that we already know. So in the long run, I'm like, come on, let's challenge these things. I was invited to speak at a climate change summit, which was highly comical to me, that was hosted by one of our congressmen. And I mean, I was on the main panel with a bunch of high level people from across the country, like people that were way out of my league. And I held the stage with them. And the first thing out of my mouth was, I don't believe that man-made climate change is an existential threat to people. And I mean, you could hear an audible gasp in the room. I
Oh yeah.
mean, like how dare you? But then I went to talk about how agriculture is a net zero thing and how the American Corn Belt takes more carbon out of the atmosphere than the Amazon rainforest does it at peak production, and went into talking about managing forests and grazing for wildfires. You want to know what puts off more carbon than anything is these giant wildfires that they're having down in California all the time because they don't graze the hills like they used to, nor should they. And so they're missing the boat. So I'm here and ready for people to challenge these ideals. But you talked about something back there that I think is really important, and I don't think we should skip over. And a bit ago, when you were talking about the carrots and the nutrient density and the way that we have shifted to growing food in a fast way, and we're growing for yields, we're not growing for nutrition. You see these people are talking out of both sides of their mouth in this because don't get me wrong. I'm not bashing on any types of them. I'm just trying to point out the obvious and flesh out some ideas. You see this huge push for vertical integration in growing plants. You see this huge push for hydroponics and hydroponic greenhouses and growing food in warehouses in trays, not in the soil. And yet the people pushing those are quote unquote the healthiest among us, and they are. I think we're missing the boat. I really do, because I've said this for years, that in our quest for cheap food, we have created processes that are not good. And I think that the chickens are finally coming home to roost, for lack of a better term, that it's now catching up to us, that we need, it's time we take a step back and evaluate. I mean, everybody wants to talk about it. You see Robert Kennedy talking about it all the time. Now we've gone down and our food supply is unhealthy. Everybody says, our food supply is as unhealthy it has been, and all these things. But we have to look at the other side of it. What is it that we've been doing to our food supply? We've been we've been outsourcing it to different countries. Two, we've been vertically integrating it and trying to grow more on less. And yes, we need to feed this population, but people have to understand we've got to stop condensing this and forcing this growth into a small area, because it's costing us.
Yeah, amen to all of that. So many points that you raised. One of the things that came to mind was a quote from Mark Twain. He said, "It ain't what you know, it ain't what you don't know that gets you. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so, huh?" And that's the value of dialogue,
Yeah,
is that we all come with thoughts that have been developed for in a number of ways for a whole bunch of reasons, huh? And there's validity to each of those. But if you can all get together and start to uh, speak from your hearts, not attacking one another, but raising different viewpoints, then everybody's mind gets more and more open, right? I
yeah,
remember this lady, Christy Mack is her name. She in her evaluation of this undergrad class I was talking about, it was just the most beautiful thing I've ever read related to what was happening in there, and just saying how you listen to people with these different viewpoints, and she said over and over again, another person's view's been blasted by another person coming from a different standpoint. And she didn't mean this way. She just meant it opened your
yeah,
mind to something you had never thought of. She said, sometimes I don't even know which is the right way, the right answer when I
sure.
sit. And she said, but listening to different people's beliefs and where those beliefs come from has been such an amazing thing in this class. And it's not that you don't act, but it's simply that you make the
Yeah,
mind get more and more open, right? And so you
you
act on
catch more
much
flies with
more.
honey than you do with vinegar.
That's right, and much you're behaving then based on much more information than
Hmm.
just maybe your own. It just opens the mind up, and that collective knowledge, if it's coming from people of different backgrounds, I would say can be so valuable, invaluable, right? And so
Absolutely.
it's not good when farmers and ranchers aren't a part of the conversation, because that's a hugely important voice that's coming, at least in the days when I was involved, from people who are so grounded and centered and had a lifetime of 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 knowledge. Um, and I often like to make the point, we've this is not against education. I spent my life doing that sort of thing, but there's many ways to learn, right? And I think that personal experience of an environment that you can get through ranching and farming is
Hmm.
is it's invaluable. And
It's
maybe
real
that
world.
gotten the weight that it should, as we move more and more into you know university learning, or whatever a person wants to say. um, a person doesn't want to discount that knowledge that comes from personal experience, the kind of Henry DeLuca lifetime experience of learning
Yeah,
from a landscape, and learning how to live in a landscape, and the lessons of life. There needs to be both, right? Both things. And
yeah,
but then that broader thing that you were talking about, and that I've been talking about, that wisdom of the body to from a nutritional standpoint, to know what it
Yeah.
needs, right? If it's got wholesome foods to select from. Um,
Your brain's no different.
that's right. The brain is one of the organ systems. Huh? The problem is when you're listening to the authorities, it's this part that's taking over, right?
Yeah.
And when this part thinks it's in control of the shop, it's not running the shop. It's a secondary organ to a whole to a
Whole
whole.
bunch.
There was a book I read back in the day titled A Change of Heart, and it was written by a lady named Claire Sylvia. She was one of the first people to receive an organ transplant. She got the
Hmm.
heart and lungs of a 20-year-old boy, as she came to find out. She didn't know this at the time. 20-year-old young man put into her 40-some-year-old female body. And that book is amazing to because you think, well, like a physician told her, heart's just a damn pump. She said, no, it's not just a damn pump. You don't have a clue. Take somebody else's and put it in your body, and you'll see it's not
You
just a damn
understand.
pump. The heart and lungs. There's a whole knowledge that's in those that you don't even appreciate. And it's a fascinating book, but I'll often talk about it in relation to the fact that her preferences for foods broadened out to
Hmm.
include foods that Tim loved and that she used to hate, you know.
Wow.
So she's there, she's about to be released from the hospital. And after the interview, back in those days, it was big news, right? So they were
Yeah.
interviewing her. After the interview, one of the guys said, so if you could have anything you want right now to eat, what would you want? She said, actually, I'd like a beer. And then she said, the minute those words came out of her mouth, she wished she could take them back for two reasons. One, it was a flippant response to an honest question. She said, two, I don't even like beer. Then she goes on to talk about how these foods, from green peppers to first time she could drive, her car nearly drove itself off the road to go to a chicken McNuggets when she passed it. All these foods she never liked.
Yeah.
That's the heart and lungs, but then it's beyond just food. She's talking about the whole array of the heart as a magnetic system, and we don't even realize this though,
Yeah.
right? I mean, how are you going to realize? But that's when you say this is a secondary organ, but when it gets trying to run the shop, you can get into problems. And you articulated it so well earlier when you said, you get whiplash from all the different ways. Are eggs good or bad, or uh, meat good or bad, or on and on and on and on. How you
Sure.
should be eating eggs, you shouldn't be eating eggs. Why not
And what
just trust
works for
the gut?
different people. I think
Right.
that's why you see such a discrepancy in all these diets. People, one person's like, oh, the carnivore works great, or low carb, or Atkins, or whatever the new fad diet is. And it works great for some person, but it
That's right.
doesn't work for somebody else because you don't need the same things as that person. Your
That
body is not working the same as that person. That's why these studies, they don't work
you
because
have
you're not the same.
you have said it all right there, and I just can't. That point cannot be emphasized enough. Everyone is different. We did so many studies of that. I won't bore you with that, but just over
Yeah.
and over again, when you offer animals choices, and I talked about that a little earlier with the sheep and cattle on the feedlot finishing studies, but over and over again, and same with poisonous plants. I'm thinking of larkspur. Larkspur can
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
bad for cattle, right? When you look at the poisonous plants lab, they looked at 5 different breeds of livestock of cattle and their susceptibility to the toxins that are in larkspur. There's more variation within a breed than there is across breeds. It just
Yeah.
shows, this tremendous
And
variability.
lupine for sheep is the same.
Yeah, it's the same. It's such a key point that each person is different, and nobody can tell you. You have to get in touch
Hmm.
with your own body, right? But you're never going to hear that talked about, Carson. I mean,
No,
how often do you hear anybody talking about get in touch with the wisdom of your own body, physically, spiritually? Get in touch with, go inward and get in touch.
absolutely.
It's not, it's, and there's no money to be made in that, in a sense,
No.
right? I mean, in a one sense, there is of find wholesome foods, expose your body to those, and let your body just direct you day to
See
day.
what works for
What
you.
tastes good? What tastes good, right? And that's going to
Yeah.
be the integrator of all this other stuff. But you're
Other
not.
than sugar, watch out for that because it tastes good to everybody.
That's right, and that's where that's where it's the food industry. In the years that I was doing all the stuff, that this whole group of us were doing these studies over the years. I'd be invited to all these conferences, and a bunch of them would have people that studied humans,
Yeah.
that were working on humans. And we were all talking about the same principles and processes. It doesn't matter. It's just what you said earlier, whether you're a goat or a cow or a bacteria or a fish or a bird, whatever. It's the same principles and processes that are driving this, the need for nutrients. But boy, you'd listen to those people from industry talk. And I used to think then, I didn't realize really how bad it was, where it was leading, all this stuff,
Yeah.
But I'd listen, I'd think, man, that's so clever how they're designing this thing and that thing, the next thing, to hijack the wisdom of the body, basically, a ton of it.
Well, sure. I mean, look
And
at the food pyramid. I mean, one of the biggest scams of all time. I mean, when we talk about that, it's again, which science are we going to trust? Because when you're creating a fattening ration for cattle, what they were feeding you in the food pyramid was exactly what you're going to feed to somebody to fatten them. Now we wonder why there's an obesity epidemic.
that's exactly right. And it's the same thing for our pets too. If you look at the labels on pet food things, that's the same.
Yep.
It's just ultra processed foods for cats and dogs and so forth.
Yep.
That's absolutely, I couldn't agree more. That's where we've gotten, and that's why we've got. That's right. You want to fatten them and feed them the same thing that we're getting from ultra processed foods. That's
No, and I
yeah.
think this just comes back to it. It's the evolution of agriculture, but the people, and this might sound semi narcissistic, but the people who know best are the ones that are closest to it, who have been doing it for hundreds of years. You talk about animals learning. Well, people do too. I mean, we took a herd of sheep to some new pasture that we hadn't been on before, and the sheep hadn't been there historically. And the first year we dumped them off, and like the first couple hours, we lost a bunch to lupine. One, we had never really dealt with that breed of strain of lupine before up in northern Utah, and two, the sheep had never seen it before. But it's funny now you can turn them out in the same pasture, and yeah, we tried to avoid it, dumping them on it right off the truck, but they'll avoid it now. I mean that they have learned over time that they need to avoid that, and we don't have a problem with it anymore after 6 or 8 years. They don't eat it, they don't die from it, and I think that offspring is learning. But we don't, as people, we don't take the same advice as we give the animals. We don't put the same care into understanding as we do animals, and that is really the evolution of ag, and where we're at today is because we have to take that step back, and we need to start paying attention, and those closest to it are probably the ones you want to listen to.
Yeah, no, amen to everything you said. And I worked really closely with people at the Poisonous Plants Research Lab in Logan over the
Mm-hmm.
years. Good friends, and you know, they're just infinite number of stories related to what you just said on the lupine.
Yeah.
But and one of the things we were seeing too as we went along and got toward the end of our careers is that the more you got people buying ranches that were inexperienced, they didn't have any the knowledge, that you would
Yeah.
have the transgenerational knowledge, they would get into more problems, like you just mentioned, because they didn't have that knowledge, right? They didn't
Yeah.
have the knowledge of, well, you better be careful on this range at this time. You don't want to put them into a place they've never been before, and so forth and so on. All that makes for very instructive and fascinating kinds of stories about, whether it's losing entire flocks of sheep to halogeton back in
Mm.
the day. I don't know if you've ever seen those
Oh,
photos,
seen it.
1,000 sheep all
No,
dead.
I've seen it
Yeah,
first. I've seen other guys do it. Dump them out on a plot of halogene and lose 200 right off the truck.
yeah, and they don't know. And if those animals are given time, just as you're saying, to learn about that plant. And also, there's microbes in the rumen that degrade those oxalates that are in halogetin. And so, given a little time for those populations to get up. But
Yep.
the case out there,
No, you
the
can
sheep
eventually
were
feed them on it.
hungry and thirsty. That's right. The sheep were hungry and thirsty. They got dumped on there. It was a mistake by the people.
Yep.
And, and it's not blaming, they're just not realizing, but boy, took them all out. And yeah, there's a learning that goes on at all levels, of the animals, of the people, of the
Sure.
and an evolution too, huh? The way times are now is different from 50 years ago, different from 100 years ago, ecologically, economically, socially. And so we all
Yeah.
have to keep evolving, right? The whole thing has to keep moving, evolving, changing,
Right.
and adapting. And it's a
But what
beautiful,
does that teach us? I mean, but what does that teach us? Be careful who you listen to. We hear
yeah,
all these thought leaders on social media, and it's easy to believe, and they make this slick video, and they've got this marketing money, and they can tell you what to believe. Guys, be careful what you believe, and be
yeah,
careful who you listen to. And again, those who know the most about it are probably the ones that are going to have the best idea of what's going on. I mean,
yeah,
you want to learn how to manage range. You want to learn how to make sure the longevity of it's there. Go to somebody whose livelihood depends on making sure that it's there next year,
that's
whose
right.
animals are going to need something to eat there next year. Because at the end of all of this, there's going to be so much information out there that you garner through the internet and this influx, and it is endless to what you can learn now. But it's time we start dialing back now and questioning. Sure, question what we think, question what you do, and make sure you refine those beliefs, especially around ag, because it seems, and I believe that the fight's going to continue, that this climate change versus agriculture, it is going to be the battle of the next 10 years. I truly believe that as food production comes home to the United States through the tariffs and things that we're seeing right now, you're going to see a massive pushback on both ends of it. And you're seeing it not just here, but globally. I mean, the UK, Holland, you see the farmers' protests, you see all these geopolitical things that are happening right now. It's all centered around agriculture and growing food. And to me, and this is way down the rabbit hole, but you look at control at any point in history when a government or a dictator wanted to take over a country, the first thing they do is go after the food supply. First thing they do is target the farmer. And that's because people will go to a lot of lengths and give up a lot of freedoms to be able to feed their children and to feed themselves. And so it is a time of information. It is the time to do your own research, but also let's do it right. Let's make sure that nutrient density is there. Let's make sure everybody's getting what they need. Let's make America healthy again, for that matter. I don't care which side of the political spectrum you're on. That is something everybody should be able to get behind, because we have a problem here, whether we want to admit it or not. And we've created some processes that are not great. Fred, I'm sure you and I could go on for days and days about everything. And I guarantee this is not the last time that they see us together on the podcast. But in closing, is there anything you want to leave people with that you think is extremely important until we meet again next time?
Well, I tell you, Carson, I was laughing when you were saying, when you were talking just in this last segment about being careful about about who you listen to and what you listen to. I was thinking, better take that advice for this podcast right here.
Exactly. Know who you're talking to.
You better be watching out on this one. Be careful. No, I
No.
know. I think we had a wonderful conversation, Carson. I enjoyed it.
Ah,
Absolutely,
me
absolutely.
too. And thank you again for
Nice to
joining
meet
me.
you. Nice to meet you.
You as well, my friend. Thank you. Take it easy.
Okay, you betcha. You take care too.
Thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed this episode, hit that like button, subscribe to the podcast, and make sure you turn on your notifications so you know when we release a new episode. Thanks again, and we'll see y'all soon.